Never know. It's a show. Does it show you? Yeah.
Man, it really is pretty.
All right, I think everybody's here now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First up, we've got some agency report outs, and we've got Dr. Summers here joining us from the Department of Agriculture. I told him he had to give us a 20-minute speech, but anyway, if any of the directors up here on the stage, if they have any reports other than Shelby's report out that they'd like to share, anybody? Okay, Dr. Smith?
I mentioned our last meeting that we were in the process of doing a voluntary survey of residents in the watershed to look at septic systems and what kind of needs there might be. We initially focusing on Newton County, reached out through Facebook and some local newspaper ads. We had 20 respondents, and through those responses we found that the majority of those respondents had older septic systems, older than 16 years old, some over 20 years old. About half of them weren't sure that their septic systems were working properly, and 40% of the respondents requested technical assistance, and we contacted those. We did not find any failing systems, but we were able to work with them to help answer questions and be a resource to them. So we'll continue to survey, particularly in the Mill Creek watershed area, and we'll just give updates as we go along.
Okay, that's great news. All right, I guess we'll, if there's no other agency reports, we'll go ahead and I think everybody's got the minutes from the last meeting. If there's no corrections to any of those, and I've looked them over, I think they look well. We'll go ahead and consider those reviewed and move on down the list here. We're going to set our meeting date for the first quarter of next year, and I don't know, folks, anybody got a preference? We've got a calendar there in front of you. Of course, there's a lot of things going on in January, everybody getting back from vacations and all that. I don't know whether we should probably wait till February. Anybody have a problem with February 12th? We'll just go ahead and pencil in February 12th then for the meeting date for the first quarter of 2019. And Director Keough, of course, I'll speak for Julie a minute. We talked last night, and she's not been able to be here today. She had an emergency meeting she had to attend. But we've discussed a little bit about, trying to wrap this up. We're not getting the participation that we've had in the past, and maybe looking at someone to sponsor the work that's going to be going on in the watershed, similar to what's going on in the Illinois River watershed. And so hopefully we'll be working towards something to that for that next meeting, and maybe we won't have to have as many of these won't have to continue with the quarterly meetings for the BBRAC. Next we've got Mark Faust here. Mark is going to give us a report from, he's the superintendent of the Buffalo River National Park. Mark, welcome.
Afternoon. Thanks for having me. I thought just I'd give a brief overview of myself if I haven't met all of you. I'm 4 months into my new position as the superintendent for the National Park Service at the Buffalo National River. I've been drinking from the fire hose, so to speak, as far as getting up to speed on all things Buffalo River. And one of the great things that I've been able to do is start talking to as many stakeholders as I can. And as soon as I found out about the beautiful Buffalo River Action Committee, I was excited as I read, the reason behind it, and the mission of the BBRAC falls right in line with the mission of the National Park Service at Buffalo National River. So I really see the opportunity for us to work together, all of your agencies and the BBRAC, with the Park Service and the local constituents and stakeholders up in all the counties around the Buffalo is a great way for us to proceed. So one of the things I think that I was asked to speak to you about today was the idea of having a Buffalo River Science Symposium this spring. And that's just an idea on real basic terms to get stakeholders in the room together and talk about what we know. Go over the science that we know we have, some of the studies that have been done, and how that relates to the watershed, which would then lead eventually into what don't we know. And then the third leg of that is how do we proceed? How do we get the information we need to know and have a group of stakeholders that understand where it is we're going and agree upon how we can get there. So that's just really basically what the Buffalo River Science Symposium would start us down the road for. Fearing that I would lose the facility, I went ahead and reserved the Duran Center, which is right across the street from the Buffalo National River headquarters in Harrison. It'll be April 23rd and 24th. We are looking for as many presenters as we can to cover the basics of the best available science for all things watershed. And we think that we can pull that off in 2 days. It will be open to all the stakeholders in the watershed. And the room, we have the largest room in the Duran Center, which is upwards of 200 people. So if you're interested also, I'd invite the BBRAC to take the meetings on the road, and I'll host it if we can up there for you. I know it's difficult as everybody's based here in Little Rock, but I'd be more than happy to help facilitate a meeting in the watershed. With that, can I answer any questions about my background or what I'm looking to do?
Tell us about what you did prior to moving to Buffalo.
So for 4.5 years, I was the superintendent of Dinosaur National Monument in Utah and Colorado. That's a 210,000 acre monument with 2 incredible rivers running through that monument. Most people know Dinosaur for the fossil collection that is in the 80 acres that started the monument back in 1915. But the Yampa River and the Green River in Colorado are the 2 main resources that are very similar to what the Buffalo has going on, as the Yampa is the last large unregulated river in the entire Colorado River Basin. So a lot of the issues dealing with the water quality and water quantity in the Yampa is similar to what you all are tackling in the Buffalo watershed, although I can tell you that as with the Yampa being that last unregulated river, the focus on the greater Colorado River Basin made it sometimes a little difficult for the Yampa to make it in there. So that goes again back to the mission of the BBRAC. Being focused on the watershed of the Buffalo is very exciting to me that we have this opportunity already built for us to work together. Before that, I was a chief ranger for 8 years in Glacier National Park in Montana, and then I won't go into the rest of it, but 30 years in the Park Service, and couldn't be more pleased to be in Northwest Arkansas now.
I remember you told me you worked with some watershed areas.
Yeah, the middle fork of the Flathead River in Glacier National Park is, the North Fork is halfway in the park. The middle fork is right on the southern boundary. Both wild and scenic rivers, very similar issues. The use on the Flathead River outside of Glacier, very similar to what is going on with the explosion, so to speak, of private river use that is similar to what's happening at the Buffalo River. With more up there is more along the lines of rafting, but here the kayaking and the canoeing is, river management is similar throughout the West. So lots of focus areas that we could learn from other parks I've been in. To the Buffalo is its own unique situation that deserves quite a bit of study. Sir.
For the symposium, are you primarily trying to gather perspectives and information from the Buffalo River, or more trying to bring in ideas from other areas that could be utilized here, or some combination of both?
I think there's room for both. We haven't finalized it. It's just in the beginning stages. I reached out to the directors to see if it was something that they'd be interested in. I think there is room for both, in that there are some very specific studies that have gone on over the years at the Buffalo that we want to make sure everybody has a common understanding of what that best available science is. But then I think there's also areas to learn from other watersheds. I know that the last time the BBRAC met, there was a presentation on the Illinois watershed. And we've had, there is information out there with regard to algal blooms from other watersheds that could also be presented, leading us to the area, well, what don't we know about the Buffalo watershed? So still in development, but room for both.
Yeah, on the topic of that symposium, has there been any thought put into reaching out to the universities who may be doing research in the watershed, or having plans to do aquatic research, for instance?
Absolutely.
I was going to say, like, I know UCA and Arkansas Tech are pretty involved out there, and they'd be a good group to reach out to. Not that the other universities aren't too, but
Absolutely. And what I'd like to do is have a joint organization to help us put together the agenda for the science symposium. So it's not just the National Park Service at Buffalo, but we're all talking to ADEQ and USGS and the universities.
We certainly appreciate you coming here and having shown us the interest that you have. The former director didn't go this far, and we appreciate you being here and doing that.
It's my pleasure. I look forward to working together for quite a long time, hopefully.
Thank you. Now, with moving on down the schedule, we've got USGS here today. Billy Justice. And you've got a little presentation for us, I think.
Thank you for having me, for your interest in what USGS is doing in Buffalo. We've currently have 3 studies that we're collecting data for, and I don't want to get into the first one too much, just kind of give you an overview. Scott Game presented a few quarters ago about the microbial source tracking work that we're doing there. We also have a study that we're conducting on and around Big Creek, upstream and downstream of Big Creek. And we have a study with, that study was actually with the Park Service. The first MST study was with ADQ. And then Game and Fish provided us funding this year, and we were able to match it and start a study looking at filling this out. So, trying to give you a quick overview of all three of those projects. So, just a little bit about USGS. We were established in 1879, and the key to our longevity has been our impartiality. We do work with all federal, state, local governments, and non-government entities. Now, as far as the Buffalo River, we're naturally interested in all of our, with the water division, so all of our streams, we have gauges, we do water quality work on a lot of streams, but the public interest in the Buffalo alone has made it a priority for the Lower Mississippi Gulf Water Science Center, which is what I work for. And in 1972, as y'all all know, Buffalo became the first national river, and since that time it's been extremely popular. It was estimated in 2015 that there was about 1.7 million people visited the Buffalo. That has pumped a bunch of money into the economy. Those visitors spent about $78 million, created well over 1,000 jobs, and it's just been a big boost to the local economy. From the ecological and aesthetic standpoint, it's also very important to us. It's got species of fish that macrovertebrates, mussels, fish that are rare in our state interest. And there are 2 reaches, including the one on Big Creek, that's critical habitat for a federally listed mussel species, So just a real brief recap of what most of you probably heard from Scott Game when he was here 6 months or so ago. The Mill Creek study, there has been a tremendous amount of interest associated primarily with the hog farm, to do source tracking on the Buffalo River. ADQ approached us in the middle of all that and said, from what we know, Mill Creek has real high bacteria counts. We consider that to be a good place to kind of get our feet on the ground with source tracking. Can you work with us on Mill Creek? And so we matched funding from ADQ to determine where these high bacteria nutrient levels, what the sources are. The most likely sources, from just looking at the landscape, are humans, cattle, and poultry. And before we can start correcting the measurements, or making corrective measures, we need to find out, what ratio is associated with those sources. So, just a few things that we learned about Mill Creek, and just as an example of bigger things to come with the Buffalo downstream. One of the first things is that water goes all different directions in the karst environment. From the Mill Creek study, there's been a lot of previous work, and so the geology really looks like Swiss cheese, where you've got all of these fissures and water flowing through these fissures in different directions. To make it more complicated, it can go under mountains, under hills, like it's doing from Cricket Creek to Mill Creek. So that was some kind of an eye-opening experience. And the other thing is that nutrient concentrations in the groundwater from these big springs that are the source of Mill Creek have a lot higher concentrations than a lot of the surface waters around there, including Big Creek tributaries. So the tributaries such as Big Creek. So that was sort of set the tone for what we were going to find with some of our other studies. And just, you know, a little bit of background about the source tracking is that the way this works is all of these different animals have different microbes in their gut. They have different genetic sequences associated with those microbes that we refer to as markers. And we can detect those markers in source samples or the manure, fresh manure, and once we have identified it, we can go out with water and you can partition out where the nutrients and where the bacteria that we're detecting in those water samples are coming forward with that method. So that's just an overview of the method and what we have going on there. So in 2017, USGS and with Park Service employees listed up here, Sean and Ashley, we prepared a proposal for USGS funding through a national research grant, and we were successful in getting that money, and it was a 3-year study. We're in the second year of data collection. We proposed to sample 2 sites above Big Creek, sample in Big Creek, and 3 sites downstream. It's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple upstream, downstream design. You know, there were questions at the time about, I mean, there was a lot of conclusions at the time that Big Creek was having a big effect on the water quality in the Buffalo. So just a little background with that. You're all aware of the hog farm, which began operation in 2013. It has capacity for about 6,500 hogs, most of which are probably pigs. Uses settling ponds, which have capacity for about 2 million gallons. But those ponds, the nutrients are the waste is stored there, and it's put on trucks, and it's spread on fields. And the permeate area was 630 acres in Big Creek and left fork of Big Creek. So the project scope is to conduct biological and chemical analysis and document water quality along the downstream gradient below the CAFO, and at control sites unaffected by the swine. So that was the real important part of the study, is trying to get sites upstream that shouldn't be affected by the hog farm. We began sampling water in May of 2017. We're going to continue through 2018. So the data that I'm going to show you is based on 15 monthly samples, most of which have been base flow, collected during base flow periods. Also, there's a component I'm not going to touch on today. It's periphyton. So we're collecting the benthic algae at these sites. And they're a very diverse group. Some of them love phosphorus, some of them love nitrogen. They can tell you a lot about the nitrogen concentrations, how much chemical nutrient uptake there is at those sites. So that's come at a later presentation. So a little background on the sites. Again, there's site 1, and that's the confluence of Whale Creek and Buffalo River. Site 2 is at Hasty, and Hasty site is about 4 miles upstream from the CAFO, or as the crow flies, I'm sorry, not upstream. But the CAFO is located at the end of the arrow, and it's 4 miles distance. Site 3 is located on Big Creek, U.S. Gated Station in Harper. I'm losing a line. Okay. And site 4 is on the Buffalo, just downstream of the confluence of Big Creek and Buffalo River. And then site 5 is midway between Mount Hershey, which is where our site 6 is located. So there's 2 or 3 miles, couple of miles of river between site 4 and 5. So we're going to present nitrate plus nitrite data and also total phosphorus. Those are pretty common nutrient constituents that can affect plant growth. These are box plots. If you're not familiar with the box plots, the middle line is the median concentration. The bottom of the box is the 25th. The top of the box is the 75th percentile. And right off the bat, you can just looking at it with your eye, you can see that Site 3 has slightly higher concentrations than the other 5 sites. That's not real uncommon with what we see with most of the tributaries to the Buffalo. And we'll say that these concentrations are pretty low. 0.1, where we usually run into big changes in the biology in the streams. I'm a biologist, so I'm looking at nutrients for the changes in the biology in the stream. And about 0.5 nitrate plus nitrite is a concentration where you really begin to run into problems. So these are pretty low concentrations all the way across. I drew a line in there to compare the median concentrations of the 2 sites upstream to the 3 sites downstream. You can see they're about the same, maybe even a little bit lower downstream of Big Creek. So we're very fortunate. Park Service began collecting water quality data on their own with help from ADQ doing the analysis. They've got data at some sites going back into the 80s. So that data, we're also very fortunate that in 2017, there was a report by the Watershed Conservation Resource Center, referenced at the bottom of the graph. And they compiled all of the data up through about 2011. So I'll focus in on these are mean nitrate concentrations for Buffalo River tributary sites between 95 and 2011. And if you compare the mean, I can't point up there, but if you compare the mean concentration, it's about 0.1, what is that, 0.16? 0.16, and the numbers at the top are what are the range, depending on which samples of ours that you consider are storm flow. That's the range. So it's very comparable. That's the value. What we're seeing now in these last 15 monthly samples that we got is very comparable to what the Park Service has collected for the previous 15-year period or whatever. And those number of samples, that's based on the bottom row is the number of samples. That's 58 samples that they collected over that period of time. So they weren't collecting at the same frequency we are, but they did have positive data. So this is total phosphorus concentrations, same bar charts, just different parameter, total phosphorus. Again, you see the Crestor Wallace is statistically different. Site 3 is statistically different, has slightly higher concentrations. I put in this green box on the Big Creek box plot to kind of give you an indication, again, where that aquatic assemblage really begins to go from a natural situation to be into what we refer to as a least impaired situation. There's a lot of literature to support this. So about remember this range, about 0.02, you begin to see for total phosphorus, you begin to get into a more degraded type area, or at least the start type, as opposed to reference best quality. If you fly in the line, again, comparing the medians, the median at Site 3, or at Site 4, just downstream of Big Creek, is just what you'd expect. It's slightly higher than what it was upstream. It's slightly higher again at Site 5. But based on these data, by the time it gets to Site 6, concentrations are about what they were upstream of Big Creek. So again, looking at the Park Service data and comparing concentrations that they have. I apologize for all y'all that are just in the back of the room, but you're going to have to trust me that that 0.014 and 0.18 is real comparable to 0.17. So basically the same concentrations that we're seeing now, we saw that Park Service has seen for all of their samples collected from 1998 to 2011. Okay, so going back to the spring data, Park Service also has data from the spring